For 20 years, I was the backbone of that company. When Westbridge Solutions was barely holding itself together, it was my pitch deck that secured the investors. When a Fortune 500 client nearly walked because of a billing error, it was my weekend, unpaid, that salvaged the relationship. I worked through holidays, birthdays, even when my son had surgery. My phone was always on. My loyalty was unshakable, not because I was a pushover, but because I believed in something that I now realize doesn't exist anymore in business: honor. Martin Walsh, our CEO, used to pat me on the back and call me the future of this company. I bled for that future. But apparently, Martin had different ideas of who the future looked like. I started at Westbridge when it was 5 guys in a cramped office above a frozen yogurt shop. No health insurance, no job security, and definitely no plan B. We took risks back then. We won some, we lost some, but I stayed. Even when others bailed, I doubled down. I stayed through recessions, lawsuits, botched acquisitions, and major layoffs. Hell, I was the one who convinced Martin not to fold the company in 2009 when our largest client declared bankruptcy. I brought in 2 new contracts that very same quarter and kept us afloat. I wasn't just an employee, I was a cornerstone. At least I thought I was. Things started to shift about a year before it all unraveled. Martin's daughter, Emily, fresh out of an overpriced business school with a degree she never earned through effort, started popping into meetings. Not as an observer, but as someone who thought she belonged. She once tried to explain blockchain to a room full of supply chain veterans like we were in a TEDx seminar. People nodded politely, but I saw the smirks. I always cleaned up after her mistakes, subtle corrections, careful redirection. I protected her because I thought that's what Martin expected. I was wrong. The red flags became impossible to ignore. She was given authority over hiring in one of our satellite offices, despite never having interviewed anyone before. She approved a massive marketing rebrand that tanked our engagement. When I raised concerns, Martin brushed them off. "She's still learning," he'd say. "She'll grow into it." She wasn't growing. She was climbing, on my shoulders. But I kept grinding. Why? Because I thought my results spoke louder than office politics. My division consistently hit above 140% target. My team had the lowest turnover in the entire company. My clients sent me thank you emails that I printed and kept in a folder labeled "Proof I Matter," a folder I looked at during the dark days when I felt invisible. But nothing could prepare me for the moment Martin called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. Cold, corporate, clinical. HR was already there. My parking pass was already deactivated. My email account, I would learn later, had been logged out remotely during the meeting. Martin didn't even pretend to be emotional about it. "Derek, you've done an incredible job, but we're pivoting. Emily will be stepping into your role moving forward. It's time to invest in leadership that reflects the next generation." I didn't speak, not at first. I couldn't. The room spun for a second. Emily was standing near the coffee machine, pretending not to listen, but I saw her little smirk, that smug, satisfied smile of someone who knew this was coming. She didn't earn it. She didn't fight for it, but she inherited it. And Martin? He just watched me with this corporate detachment, like I was a printer he no longer needed. He handed me an envelope, severance, NDA, exit paperwork, my entire identity, reduced to a few typed pages. I left the building in silence. No goodbye party, no send-off speech. My own team hadn't even been informed. I was wiped clean. Just like that. But let me tell you something I learned in those 20 years. Relationships matter more than titles. Trust matters more than office hierarchy. And I had trust, not with the executives, but with the clients. I remembered when their kids were born. I stayed up past midnight helping them during crises. I flew to 3 countries in 4 days, once to hold one deal together. I didn't just manage accounts. I owned those relationships. So when I sat in my car that day, in the parking lot I once fought to get paved,
I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone and I made my first call. It was to my biggest client. And when I told them what happened, they didn't hesitate. "Wherever you go," they said, "we follow." The days after my phone call with Martin passed by in a blur of calculated chaos. I was working non-stop, both running Greyline and keeping a close eye on Westbridge, knowing that I had to move quickly if I wanted to fully destroy Martin's empire. Every decision, every deal, felt like another brick in the wall I was building to bury him. He'd underestimated me, and now, every time he reached out in desperation, I could feel the satisfaction of my revenge creeping in. One late evening, I sat at my desk, reviewing some new contracts when my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of my old colleagues at Westbridge. He was still there, a loyal employee. He sent a simple text, "The place is falling apart, Derek. Emily is in over her head. Martin doesn't even know what to do anymore. It's like watching a ship sink." I felt a smirk creep across my face. That's exactly what I wanted. Emily, Martin's daughter, was clearly struggling to keep up, just as I'd predicted. She didn't have the experience or the connections I had spent 2 decades cultivating. But she had something I didn't, the illusion of power. However, what I knew, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that you don't rule with family ties. You rule with loyalty, respect, and competence. Emily had none of those. Martin had built his empire on the wrong foundation. The thought of it fueled my fire. Greyline was thriving, and my clients, who had felt trapped by Martin's overbearing presence, were flocking to me. I had the momentum now, and I was not going to let it slip away. But as much as I relished the victories, I knew I needed to do more than just sit back and watch. I had a message to send, not just to Martin, but to the whole industry. I was going to burn his reputation to the ground. One of my first moves was to contact a few key figures who had previously been loyal to Westbridge. Some of them had always been uncomfortable with Martin's management style, but their loyalty to the company kept them there. It didn't take much for me to convince them to jump ship. I offered them the freedom they'd longed for, along with the promise of better opportunities and creative freedom at Greyline. Within days, I had an exodus of top talent, all leaving Martin's sinking ship. But the real kicker came when I managed to secure a meeting with one of Westbridge's largest clients, a high-profile account that Martin had always considered untouchable. It was the kind of account that brought in millions and would have been the crown jewel of any competitor's portfolio. Martin had always been so proud of it. I knew it was the perfect opportunity to strike a fatal blow. The client was hesitant at first, torn between loyalty to Martin and the cold, hard facts that Greyline was now offering something Martin couldn't, innovation and a fresh perspective. I laid it on thick, showing them how my new team could bring more value to their business. I showed them the future, a future without the chains that Martin had wrapped them in. A few days later, I received a call from the client. They were making the switch to Greyline. I couldn't suppress my smile when I hung up the phone. The client was mine, and Martin would never know what hit him. The next day, I scheduled another meeting with Martin. He had no idea what I was about to do, but I was ready. I'd been planning this for weeks. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. It wasn't just about taking his clients. It was about making sure that no one ever looked at Westbridge the same way again. When I arrived at his office, the look of shock on his face was almost comical. He had no idea that the accounts he thought were still safely tied to his company were already in my hands. He didn't know that the people he trusted had already walked away, one by one. I could see the panic setting in behind his eyes as I sat across from him, calm and collected. "I told you, Martin," I began, my voice cool. "You should have never underestimated me." His eyes flickered with disbelief. "What are you talking about? You think you've won? You think taking my clients is going to make a difference? You're nothing without Westbridge." I leaned forward, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You're wrong," I said. "I am the company, Martin. You and your daughter, you're just the facade. But I have the vision, I have the loyalty, and I have something you'll never have again: control. Your empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The reality of the situation was finally hitting him, and I could see it in his face. This wasn't just about clients. This was about his legacy, his pride, his name, everything he had worked so hard to build, all falling apart because of his arrogance. I stood up to leave, knowing the damage was already done. "By the way," I said, pausing at the door, "don't bother trying to take me down. You'll find it much harder to build a legacy from the rubble you left behind." I could feel the weight of my revenge settling in. Martin had built his empire on control and manipulation, but in the end, it was his own sense of superiority that had torn it all down. And as I walked out of that office, I knew that this was only the beginning. The future was mine, and I was ready to take it.